Welcome to Left Coast Kayak Fishing. Today we're going to be going into how to win the Moutcha Bay Kayak Derby. Hi, I'm Henry Cole, your host on Left Coast Kayak Fishing. Back in 2017, I had the idea to go to the West Coast and fish the Nooka Marine Adventures Moutcha Bay Kayak Derby. I went out there really wanting to win and did the research, did my homework, bought some gear, and went out there, had a great time. Really love this derby. Took me a couple of days to really dial it in, but on the last day, things really came together and I had an absolute blast. But anyway, enough of me jabbering on, let's get down to it. We'll start with a quick share on safety, then dive into each topic for a detailed look. And then at the end of the video, stick around because I got some bonus tips. With over 100 competitors fishing this tournament, there's a lot of help if something should happen. There's Nooka Marine Adventures boats situated throughout the bay for the tournament, so if something serious did happen, there's a lot of safety built into this tournament. That being said, always wear your PFD. I've seen guys flip on the calmest days. So in a general sense, what we're trying to do is find the fish, get on top of them, and make them angry enough to strike our lures. We need to keep in mind that there's a lot of anglers around. We need to avoid their lines and land the fish as quickly as possible. So the first thing we got to focus on is the location. This is Moutcha Bay, and the bay is the boundary for the tournament. The mouth of the bay is the edge to the southwest, and the Canooma River mouth is the edge on the northeast. Nooka Marine Adventures post buoys along the river mouth to delineate how far into the shallows you can go. Second, we need to talk about the fish themselves. This time of year, they're not typically biting out of hunger. It's more of a territorial bite, an anger strike, you could say. These fish are typically run around in schools throughout the bay, getting acclimatized to the fresh water. You'll find that the fish sometimes swim up the river on a high tide and then come back down on a low tide. A lot of fish in a school will be roughly the same size, but don't let that discourage you if you're catching the same weight fish over and over again. The winner that I caught came in 2017 after 35 fish caught in the same location in 4 hours. This 27.5 pound fish had obviously already been up the river. She wasn't even caught at the river mouth, but down the south wall of the bay, right here. So the technique that I found to be most effective is jigging. This is for 2 reasons. First, there's a lot of people chasing these schools. If you're all casting and chasing them, you're going to end up with a lot of tangles. Second, with jigging, you can get your lure into the zone where the fish are. It's easier to get it there, and you can keep it there longer. So we can really break our technique down into a few different points to see what we're trying to accomplish and how we're going to go about it. So we got to find the route of the fish. This is where a day of pre-fishing comes in handy. Sometimes they're going to be straight off the river mouth. Sometimes they're going to be along the south wall. Other times they're going to be right in front of the Moutcha Bay Resort itself. If you can't arrange a full day of pre-fishing or even a half day of pre-fishing, another technique that is kind of a shortcut to finding the fish is to watch other people hooking up, kind of noticing the pattern of the hookups, and try to move in on where they're at or predict where the fish are moving to and go about it that way. The only problem with that is that you're waiting for other people to hook up before you're getting on the fish, and obviously that's going to lower your chances of winning the derby. Once you're on the fish, you want to determine how deep they are. Rarely have I seen the fish moving along the bottom. Usually they're suspended mid-water column. It's surprising how often it happens, but you'll see 6 anglers sitting in a crowd. One guy is hooking up in the middle, the rest of them aren't. And this is almost always due to the depth that they're fishing. If needed, talk to the anglers that are hooking up, see what depth they're at, see what route the fish are taking, see what lure they're using, and we'll talk more about that later in the video. So now we move on to how to fight your fish in this derby. It goes without saying that if your lure's in the water, you have a better chance of winning the derby. If you're taking a sleigh ride back and forth through all the competitors, unless you're tied up to the derby winner, you're not going to be winning. Everyone in this tournament's pretty good. They'll raise their gear, they'll get out of your way, but after the 3rd or 4th time of you going back and forth, you're going to start making some people angry. To avoid this and spend more time fishing instead of fighting these hogs, I try to do two things. I look around for a good place to fight the fish and move there if I can lead the fish. Sometimes I do this by pulling, but other times I will actually pull the opposite direction of where I want to go, and the fish will take off the opposite way, and I'll let him run just a little bit and move with him. Now I know this is easier said than done, but it helps others keep fishing and also gets my line away from theirs. Less chance of tangles, less chances of losing that fish. The other thing that I like to do once I get clear, or even if I can't, is to stay vertical. You want your jig, you want the fish right underneath you as you're fighting them. If you let the fish take a run out, the hook is now rotated sideways in his mouth, making the hole bigger. Every time you bring that fish in, it's gone vertical, back out again, it's gone sideways. So as that hook works back and forth, that hole's getting bigger and you increase your chance of losing that fish. If a fish takes a long run out, it can turn and come at you and you're fighting to keep the tension in the line that you really want there. Even with head shaking, side to side head shaking, you can get some slack in the line. If you're vertical and the fish is down there shaking its head sideways, it's not putting the slack in the line, you're constantly pulling straight up. And at the same time, fish aren't built to fight you straight up. You're going to tire them out a lot quicker if you're pulling straight up than sideways. All their muscle, their fin is sideways. Everything can pull sideways. They can turn their head a lot easier if you're pulling sideways. If you're above them, you're going to tire them out way faster. Okay, so now we get into the technical stuff, the gear. So starting with kayaks, I prefer a pedal kayak. You're able to move around people. You're able to get on top of the fish. You're able to stay in place in the wind. But that being said, you guys know that James Macbeth won the Los Buzos Kayak World Championship in a paddle kayak, and he was the only guy to use a paddle kayak. There's a lot of people catching really good fish in this derby from paddle boards and other hard-to-use vessels. So a fish finder is going to be a huge asset when fishing the Moutcha Bay Derby. You could ask a buddy what depth the fish are at, but the next time they roll through, they could be 10 feet deeper, 20 feet deeper, or even shallower, and you don't want to be waiting for the next update. I don't think you need the most expensive unit. Anything that can read a wall of fish is going to work for this derby. When I won in 2017, I did it with this clamp-on Humminbird fish finder. I'd just be keeping an eye on it, and the bottom would be at 50 feet. And when the school of fish came in, the bottom would then be at 30 feet, and I knew I had to drop my jig to 30, 35 feet, maybe 40 feet, and I'd be right in them. So for rods, I prefer a 7-foot or close to 7-foot jigging rod. I want to have something that's a little bit shorter to alleviate the fatigue of jigging. If you're using a longer rod, you're going to get tired faster. As most of you know, jigging can get tiring, especially after 6-7 hours. You're fighting a bunch of fish, you're going to tire out. You want a rod that has a fairly stiff butt section. That way you can put some heat to the fish, but at the same time you want a fast tip so it helps pick up slack in the line really quickly. Another thing to keep in mind is to balance your jig weight to your rod, but we'll talk more about that when we get to the jigs. So the last thing to think about when it comes to rods is the length of the rod. Yeah, you want it short enough you're not going to be tiring out, but at the same time you want it long enough that you can reach around the front of the kayak or the back of the kayak in case you hook a 25-pounder and he runs sideways. You don't want to be getting flipped over. For reels, I prefer a spinning reel. At the end of the video during the bonus tips, you'll see why. Any reel that you're comfortable using that has a fast retrieval rate, good line capacity, and a smooth drag is going to work. So line is a critical part of the equation. You want something with low drag and low stretch. I use Tough Line indicator line. For me, it works great because it's thin. The big thing with the indicator line is you want something that's going to be changing color. There's a ton of different indicating lines out there, but I prefer Tough Line because it's changing color every 10 feet, as opposed to some of the other ones that are changing color every 25 feet or even 50 feet. Now this is 50-pound. I use it in 30-pound, which gives me the least amount of water drag with good strength. And then for the leader, I use Seaguar fluorocarbon. Again, this is 50-pound, but I'll use 20 or 30-pound. I don't like to go much heavier than that. It starts affecting the way the lure flutters down. My leader will be about 5 to 10 feet long, and that gives me enough stretch in the line to soak up a really hard strike along with that fast rod tip. And with that 5 to 10 foot leader and the fluorocarbon, the fish aren't able to see the line as easily, which I find gives a more natural presentation. I almost exclusively use two types of jigs for the Moutcha Bay Kayak Derby. You'll find that one or the other will work better depending on the day. So these are Shimano flat fall butterfly jigs and buzz bombs. So I stick to these two jigs because I can keep them in the zone longer. If you're speed jigging, you're going to be tired really quick. You're not going to be able to keep them in the zone. You're going to rip through the zone quickly. You're going to be wasting time getting back into the zone. And what you're trying to do is actually keep the jig right in front of the fish's face, get him angry enough to actually bite it. What'll end up happening a lot of times is that fish will actually just come in and swipe it with his tail instead of biting it. Now, foul hooked fish aren't allowed in the tournament. You're allowed to keep the fish if they're hooked gill plate forward. The buzz bombs come in an array of colors. For me, the green is one of my favorites to use during the early part of the tournament. Get it right in their faces, it'll elicit a strike. So a few years ago, Shimano started developing jigs that would work in their highly pressured waters. These jigs, they wanted to elicit more of a territorial anger strike as opposed to a hunger strike. With the fish being caught a lot, it would suppress their appetite, so they had to find other ways to hook these fish. So after doing a bunch of different trials, they came up with the Shimano Butterfly Flat Fall. It's a great jig that stays in the water column longer. It flutters down horizontally. It'll go a little bit to the left, it'll go a little bit to the right, but the big key that I think works for it is that these guys stay in front of their faces a lot longer. So when I'm using these, it's typically towards the end of the tournament. I'm looking for that more natural presentation. These fish have seen a lot of lures at this point. They've possibly been hooked and released already. They've been getting pressure from boats and kayakers overhead. They could be pretty spooky. So with these, the pattern that I like the most is the black anchovy, with the sand eel coming in a close second. I find that that's going to give you a really natural presentation. It's very similar to the bait that you'll find around Moutcha Bay. So now we're going to get to jig weight. You're going to want to pick the lightest jig that you can when it comes to balancing your rod so that you can keep it in the zone longer. Obviously, the lighter the jig, the longer it's going to stay right in front of their faces, and you're going to be able to tick them off easier. You're going to want to balance the lure weight to your rod. Every rod comes with a range of weights, whether it's 1.5 ounces to 3 ounces. Sometimes they're weighted in grams. You can do the conversions if need be. Balancing the jig to the rod is critical. Without a good balance, you're going to get tired, and at the same time, you're not going to get that jig action that they're designed to give you. So I head to Moutcha Bay with an assortment of the weights. You can see them here. I have everything from 250 grams to 130 grams to 100 to 80. That way, whatever conditions, I can still stay in the zone. It can be blowing 15 knots, which you can fish there because it's not a big water body. You're not going to get blown off the water, but you will be getting pushed pretty quick. So with that and the 250 grams, I can still keep the jig right under me and increase my hookups. All right, finally, I got some bonus tips to help you hook up. If you aren't hooking up and the guy or girl next to you is crushing it, look to see what they're doing. What's different about their presentation, their setup. So much as even just staying still on the water will help you catch fish. So try to pick apart what they're doing. If it's hard to see what they're doing, chances are that 20 minutes, 30 minutes ago, they weren't hooking up. They made some kind of slight adjustment, maybe a big adjustment, and now they're catching the fish. If you ask them, they might tell you. My next tip is persistence. You gotta stick to it. I get it when you're catching a bunch of 20-pound, 22-pound fish. They're all the same weight. You're trying to get that big guy to win the derby. But you gotta stay to it. You gotta think of it like this. You're doing it right. You're crushing it. You're hooking up with fish. You're in the zone. You just gotta stay at it. When I won the derby, it was with a fish that had come down out of the river. I was fishing that spot for 4 hours, constantly hooking the same size fish. So you want to stay with it and be stubborn. My next tip is that the wind picks up every afternoon there, almost without fail. You want to save some gas in the tank to be able to fight the wind and stay on top of those fish. This is where that day of pre-scouting comes in handy. That way you know the route of the fish. You're not actually taking a derby day to go down the bay, up the bay, across the bay, and finally get out on the fish midday, and then the wind picks up and you're tired and you can't stay on top of them. So for my second last tip, the tides can really swing here. On a high tide, the fish will move in to the shallows above the mouth of the river, past where the buoys are. This is why I use a spinning reel setup. You're allowed to move up to the buoys and cast in and try to hit those fish. So for my last tip, there's a couple of trees at the mouth of the river. They force the fish to funnel sideways, and it's a great spot to set up. You want to find these trees and work just on the deep section behind them, the downstream section behind them, as the fish just come through left and right, school after school. So more on a side note, if you guys want to keep some nice chromers that you caught and you foul hooked them and it was behind the gill plate, the DFO rules actually allow you to keep those fish because they're not intentionally snagged. You're not trying to work it through and just snag fish. You're using something like this that's not even treble hooks. You're vertical jigging. You can't even target the fish per se, like to actually snag them. You're allowed to keep those fish. Now, you won't be entering them in the derby as the rules state gill plate forward, but if you want to take some home to eat, you're allowed to do that. Now, if you liked what you saw here today, hit the thumbs up and subscribe, because we're going to have a lot more of these tutorials coming your way.